morning. This is our first panel of the weekend, so again, thank you very much for coming out. And we are very thrilled to lead off our panels with our very special guest, Mr. James Roberts. Very kind of him to accept our invitation to come over here and meet with all you and chat and take your questions. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to him. He's going to do a little introduction, just talk about his background, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So enjoy yourselves.
Can you hear this? Can you hear that?
No, it's going to use this.
Can't hear you. Thank you, okay. Is that any better?
No.
The mic has the mic.
Mike.
That better? Oh, my. Okay. It's very lonely up here. The other seats are just to accentuate how alone I am. Thanks for turning up. That's a good start. This is the first of two. I don't know if you've seen my schedule. This is the first of two sessions. This is a better one. I figure that if you made the effort to turn up at 9 o'clock today, then you deserve more spoilers. The more dedicated section of the fan base, and the better looking as well. So that's good. I've just been dropped into this. Okay, so it's my job to entertain you for 50 minutes. I'll be relying quite heavily on questions. And I think I should start off with some. We should warm up the crowd. We should get ourselves relaxed in each other's company. So I'll tell you a bit about me, Transformers related. The other stuff, it's not worth hearing about. I'll give you a Transformers bio thing, and then I think we should go straight into questions and answers in that order. Questions first. That works best. And then then the love in the room will grow. We'll be more relaxed, and then we'll get off to a good start for this weekend. Okay. Good. Right. So, like you, I'm a fan. I had a conversation last night with the IDW crowd. We were interviewed for a podcast, and we were talking about 30 years. And Meg Ray was saying that she got into Transformers through Beast Wars, and that makes me feel old. and there's some of you who got into this franchise through Beast Wars, and you'll meet people and they'll say, oh yeah, I got into it through Armada, and then you'll feel old, and that's how the cycle will go on. But I was there nearly at the beginning. I was conscious of the toys and the comics when they came out. I remember seeing in the UK, we barely had 3 channels on TV when I was young, and on the third one they showed the first series of the cartoon. They sliced it up into little 80-second segments, bizarrely. But I remember seeing that. I remember seeing the 4 million years later caption on the screen, and my 8-year-old brain collapsed. And then I got into the UK comic a couple of years later. So I wasn't there in the sort of the first, the halcyon days when the actual toys were in the shops and I could go and buy them. But I was aware of the brand. So I got into things in a big way through the UK comic. That reprinted all the American stuff, and crucially had all new British originated material slotted in. 99% of it written by Simon Thurman. And so I got into the whole Transformers thing really through the comics more than the toys, although I was getting them as well. And again, last night in this conversation about the 30 years, we were saying how it's really only in the UK and Europe, about Japan. But, after the American comic finished in 91, and the G1 toy range over here sort of finished in 1990, 91, it carried on for a few years. In fact, in the UK, toy-wise, we bridged the gap between 91 and Beast Wars. So it was continuous for us. But there was that, especially by that time, I don't know how old I was, 16, 15, there was that sort of realization that this was a dying brand, and it was fading away slowly after it had peaked and flared and blazed. And it was now sort of inevitably, as things did then, as toy ranges did, they peaked and then they went and they were gone. It's not like these days we've got this clutch of sort of evergreen brands, of which Transformers is arguably the biggest, which is always going to be reiterated, and refreshed and survive. But back then it seemed to me that was that. And so a group of us, the British fans who had been reared on the comic, decided to keep the story going, and we sort of got into, this is pre-internet, we got into sort of pen pals. Does that even exist anymore, pen pals? I'll explain afterwards what they mean. You used to capture your thoughts on paper and send it manually, around the world, and envelope stamps, archaic things that you won't know about. There's a group of pen pals, and we got together, and we would, amazingly, showing incredible discipline for a group of teens, we decided to continue telling the story within a shared universe. So that, we would abide by it was like a communist setup, really. There'd be the system, we'd all feed into the system, it was all for the greater good, everything had to comply with these sort of rigid framework of continuity, which is a bit like Simon Furman was doing when he was integrating his stories with the American stuff. So a group of like-minded fans got together, continued the story after the Marvel comic had finished off. So we were fan-fictioning, and I've said it, there you go, fanficker, I'm proud. And then, conscious of the time, skip forward a few years, the Marvel stuff finished, the license was lost, Dreamwave got it, IDW got it, and then a couple of, this was Transformers, Transmasters UK it was called, that was the name of this club, this group. A couple of TFUK alumni, like Nick Roach, went and did proper stuff, official stuff, for the man. And it was through Nick that I was put in touch with IDW. I spent about 18 months on and off pitching ideas, and the barren years, the lonely years. I'd handcraft something I thought was amazing, and it would be perfect, and I'd send it off by email, and then I'd go down the next morning, check my emails, and there was nothing. And it's just the cold disdain that you're shown when a pitch doesn't fly. So I went through that period, and then finally there was a way-in through Last Stand of the Wreckers. Some of you have heard, that's good. Last Stand of the Wreckers, and then that went all right. People like that. Which of course Nick Roach was Nick and I doing that. That was back in 2010, I think. Scary. Last Stand of the Wreckers did quite well, and then. Really what happened was, there was a plan with an IDW, there was this document doing the rounds, and it set out the next 3 years of the story. And this was around about, thank you, and with cyanide, that's interesting. It wasn't going well. A 3-year plan for IDW's Transformers continuity, and this was about the time that Mike Costa was I don't know, about a year into his ongoing. And there was this idea that something would happen, and the Autobots would split. And it was called Schism. And there was an X-Men, it turned out there was an X-Men event, also called Schism, that was on the cards, or that was announced before ours was, so the name was changed to Chaos. But something would happen to precipitate this divide, this sort of split. And then Optimus and Drift's name was specifically mentioned, they would go off in search of the Knights of Cybertron, and Bumblebee and Co. would be left behind on Cybertron, trying to make things better. And this was a very high-level document, because we didn't know, it wasn't specified in this document what would cause them to split. But something would happen, they would split, and then that would be the launch pad for 2 titles, one meets the eye, Robots in Disguise. The one I ended up doing was going to be called Robots in Disguise, but when we put together the ideas, the pictures for Andy Schmidt, who was John Barber's predecessor, when we put together these, our respective story outlines for the first 12 issues, 16 issues, and as you all know, if you've read More Than Meets the Eye, it was that title that was more sort of, it had more mysteries and sort of revelations and backstories being told in a rather piecemeal fashion, so there was more going on beneath the surface in that sense, and so the titles, Andy swapped the titles round. So More Than Meets the Eye was conceptualised and sort of set in train a long time before issue 1 came out in January 2012, and so that gave me time to plan. But also there was an opening, in a way, on the schedule, and I asked Andy Schmidt if I could do a one-shot about Megatron, because at the time, in Mike's ongoing, he was a captive, he'd surrendered, and wasn't quite clear why he'd surrendered. And this may have been a case of me dusting down an old pitch or something, but I know I'd always liked the idea of a 2-header, a duologue between Optimus and Megatron, and just having them in a room, having to talk to each other, having to converse. And confession, I wasn't there at the beginning with the IDW comics either. After my sort of blaze of fan fictioning in the 90s, and it culminated in this big Genesis book, I'd done that now, and I went and did other things. So it was only when Nick was lined up with work with IDW that I came back into the fray. And reading the IDW stuff, I couldn't see for myself what the Decepticons' motivation was beyond conquering. And actually, I couldn't really. I mean, Marvel UK stuff, Marvel US, there was some exploration of Megatron's motives, and Megatron Origin, of course, had already come out by that point. But there was still a gap between the events in Megatron Origin and the character we were seeing in the present day. So I said to Andy, "Can I have an issue to write that scene?" And he said, "Yes, it'll be a one-shot. It'll be published alongside Mike's Ongoing." Then it became a two-part story. Because I wanted to do an Optimus Prime flip side, and then it was, in the end, for reasons that I won't bore you with it needs to be integrated into Mike's Ongoing. So issues 22 and 23, the Chaos Theory, came out in that sort of interim year between Wreckers and More Than Meets the Eye. And writing Chaos Theory, knowing a bit about what More Than Meets the Eye was going to be, and who was going to be on the ship and so on, it allowed me to sort of seed some of the ideas that were later explored in More Than Meets the Eye. So that's the reason Whirl became Megatron's jailer. There's things in there which, basically, if you read Last Stand of the Wreckers and Chaos Theory, you've sort of got the bedrock of continuity of More Than Meets the Eye sort of established. And a lot of the things in More Than Meets the Eye that we're still riffing on have their roots in those stories. So there we are, January 2012, alongside Robots in Disguise, More Than Meets the Eye came out. My attempt was to do something a bit different with Transformers stories and have an ensemble cast, have a sort of perhaps a superficially or an ostensibly light-hearted feel to it, with darker undercurrents, but they'd be fun, and when I asked Nick to do the Justice League International, that's an old comic for some of you here, but the 80s JLI pastiche, which has been done, I know it's been done to death, but it's very good sort of visual signifier of what the mood of the book is. It's sort of encapsulated that this was a group of misfits, people with various problems and issues, most of them fundamentally decent, having a series of increasingly absurd and dangerous adventures, and getting sort of more, in quite a nice way, more remote from the sort of outside of the Transformers mainstream, and having to sort of forge ahead and make the most of what they've got in terms of their talents and abilities, and face ever-increasing threats, on different scales. So yeah, it was supposed to be. It was almost It wasn't precision engineered to be a cult book, but it, in quite a nice way, I think it's got, as evidenced by some of you guys here today and people I speak to, it's got that feel about it. It's like a little secret within the Transformers universe, and that's a good thing. So that brings us to now, pretty much. More Than Meets the Eye had a season 1, as I'm insisting on calling it, which culminated in Remain in Light. There was the sort of Skids epilogue issue. Then there was the Dark Cybertron sort of palette cleanser, which recently ended, and now we're back to season 2 for both More Than Meets the Eye and RID. And you guys, I think, are going to get issue 30 ahead of anyone else. I think, because you're going to get issue 30 this weekend, I think. Yeah, it's not out till Wednesday. So what I'm trying to say is that the BotCon exclusive More Than Meets the Eye issue 30, which is in your packages, I think, today, is not going to come out generally until next week. So you will see the finale, the last part of the Megatron Trial trilogy. You'll see how that works out. There we go. We're all up to speed now. You haven't told me much about yourselves, but we can do that after. One side, I've got a mic, so. I'm happy to, I'll try and answer whatever you ask me. I'm going to invoke the rule of spoilers though, okay? So there's going to be some hedging, but we'll see how we go.
All right, so go ahead and raise your hand if you have any questions for him.
I think everybody.
You're first.
Usually.
How are we doing? Steve, good. First of all, thank you so much for all the work you've been doing. You've rekindled my love of Transformers. just wanted to know, with you setting up the whole functionist society, is there any chance in the future of us seeing like their rise of power at all?
That's a good question, because that sort of takes us into spoilery territory, but teasing territory, which is what these things should be about. Not far around the corner is the final part of what I'm calling the Chaos Theory trilogy. So we've got Chaos Theory and Shadow Play, and there's a bit like Back to the Future or Godfather or not Star Wars, a bad example, but there's 3 of them, all right? We're going to return to that time again and pick up where we left off in a way with PAX and some other elements, and the Functionists will play a part in that. We saw one of the Functionists in issue 14, didn't we? 7 of 12 or 5 of 12 or something like that. Yes, is the short answer. It's the less value-added answer. Yes.
Thank you.
Hey James, thanks for coming and dealing with jet lag. I've got
You
one
can tell,
question.
yeah. happy to do my best if I can.
Yes, a little louder. So I've got one question for a dear friend who couldn't come and one question from me. She was wondering if you've read any of Terry Pratchett's books, if there is any influence on Orion Pax from Sam Vimes, the character? Because, you know, they're both kind of that cop from the streets that are basically decent, but hates dealing with people's crap.
I'm not familiar with the character. I am familiar with Terry Pratchett, and I've read a couple of Discworld books. I've read Good Omens with Neil Gaiman, which is really good. I think the cop, the decent cop that is sort of stifled by bureaucracy and things is a pretty well-established trope, isn't it? So I wasn't reinventing anything or inventing anything with the Pax character, but actually his character in there, I mean, the modern day Optimus Prime usually, not always, but usually is pretty guilt-ridden and sort of stooped with anguish. And we were flashing back 4 million years to a time when he was the more archetypal heroic character. You know, he was, and actually interestingly, because in the end he comes to epitomise the system, doesn't he? He's the figurehead, and he's the exemplar, and everyone looks to him for guidance and examples of how to behave. But going back to 4 million years ago, there was an opportunity to show him when he was just an ordinary guy. And actually he had more freedom to operate. You know, he was doing his own thing, he cared deeply about his job. And in that context, you could spin things a little and have him as almost the maverick type, the person who was prepared to bend things a little bit, which takes us back into familiar trope territory. But you know what I mean? It was an opportunity to look at a different side of his character.
Okay, my quick question from me is, so we've seen little hints in the IDW run of images of the Quintessons, and then there was that bit where Pharma got pulled through the portal by the creepy tentacles. Now, young man, I have read Genesis, and I know that there are certain toys you should not be allowed to play with in your sandbox, and the Quintessons are one of them. So on a scale of, 1 to hiding in a corner, never reading a comic book again, how afraid should I be?
Well, the best state of mind when reading More Than Meets the Eye is to be sort of one of heightened anxiety, I think. Every page where your character survives is a bonus. Honestly, I take it 22 bites at a time, each issue. A lot. I mean, IDW have put out well in excess now of 200 issues, and it's now become. I think now it's even if you count the Marvel UK stuff, I think it's overtaken the whole Marvel G1 continuity in terms of volume, which is a good thing. And there's relatively few things that haven't been touched upon or properly explored. Quintessons have, they've been nodded to within IDW, haven't they? In the Wheelie Spotlight, for example, and some of the pre-war stuff. I'm not leading to a revelation, I'm afraid. I'm just going to say, yes, they're in the mix. We stir the pot occasionally and wait and see what happens.
2 questions. One, first of all, thank you for being the best thing writing-wise for Transformers. 2 questions. One, Overlord. Is he gone for good or just out of the picture? I don't know can't answer
But if
that.
everyone else covers their ears, I'll tell you exactly what's going to happen with that. No. No one covered their ears. Yeah, no, he's completely dead. Completely dead.
The second question is, Star Saber, why is he a zealous genocider?
Trying to work out what your take on that is. I was, as you know, in my first flush of Transformers fandom, you know, in the 80s, late 80s, I got the Master Force. I got these really cheap, VCR, these cassettes with Master Force and Victory on. So that was my version of Star Saber was through Victory. You know, there isn't a rule which says you always have to be faithful to previous depictions, and sometimes it can be more fun to shake things up a bit. Maybe on some level, like given spoilers, given Ultra Magnus and Minimus Ambus and the situation there, the Russian doll type thing, I quite like that. Star Saber was similar to that. No, it was just the remaining. There's lots of ways of answering your question. The Remain in Light storyline, part of it, in terms of the antagonists, was about showing different pillars of society and when they go wrong. So you've got Pharma representing the sort of the medical ethics or medicine or health. You've got obviously Tyrest with legislature and the law, and then you've got in the end you've got Star Saber with the downside of religion, where that can sometimes potentially go. So I guess in a way with Remain Alive, I didn't deliberately set it out to be controversial, but the Magnus thing wasn't popular with everybody, and neither was the Star Saber thing. But Star Saber's there, he's got a character, I'm sure we'll go back to him, and we'll find there's more to him than just, he doesn't actually have much page time, if you go back and read Remain Alive, because it's quite a busy story. So we're going to return to him, and I'm not saying we'll do a U-turn on his character, but there's always more going on. In the first appearance. I wasn't going to say that. Was there another question, did you say, or was that?
This is on the topic of the religion aspect.
Is that tailgate? Just like my dream.
Are you planning on bringing Unicron into the story at any point?
There are no plans at the moment. I mean, I think we've done very well. IDW's done very well to leave that box unopened for so long. But a bit like the Quintesson thing, we know it's there, even though it's on the top shelf or behind glass in case of emergency. So if all else fails. We've got. It's good to play the long game, isn't it? And it's good, I mean, as you all know, if you've read Modern Myths, it's good to sort of have little seeds of ideas that gradually blossom. And rather than just, have Unicron pitch up out of nowhere. I mean, we've had, someone will tell me which issue it's in, but there's been allusions to someone like Unicron, isn't there? I mean, there's Primus and his opposite, I think, is the closest we've got to in Modern Myths, and Northern things, Yeah, so it's good to sort of, hint at something out there, but when we get there, there's nothing around the corner.
Hello. I've always felt that Zarin was a really interesting inclusion in the cast, being somebody's historically been something of a political leader on Cybertron. He seems like he would have wanted to stay behind, to help the, founding government going on there. Was there any, can you say anything about what the role he fills on the ship, or what his motivation was for joining the Lost Light?
Yes, that's authorial selfishness, is what happened. Basically, because I grew up with him, and I wanted him. The trouble is, in Modern Myths, there's a lot of characters, as you may have gathered, and I haven't got around to shining a spotlight on everybody that I want to so far. So I knew I wanted Zaron to be there from the beginning, and actually that was cheeky on my part, because you're right, really. Although in IDW, I mean, really, his character today exists. He's almost like a lawyer, isn't he? In Chaos Theory, he's there to advise on the legality of what they're doing with Megatron. So that's pretty much his character so far. So he may not necessarily be the sort of more the diplomat and the you know, the diplomat we saw in the Marvel stuff. He's still on board. He's still on board in season 2. He isn't, but he was going to be in issue 34. But he's in my head. He'll get some love in the end.
Hey James. First of all, way to work the crowd. I mean, you guys are going to be a hard act to follow on Sunday.
You've heard about the plans, yeah.
So when I attended the IDW panel last year, a lot of people were asking, when are we going to see the DJB again? So yeah, same question. I'm kind of wondering lately how they're going to react to certain developments with Megatron and what have you.
Yeah. The DJD sit above season 2. In big ways and small ways, most of what's happening or will happen can be linked to them, because I mean, you and many others straight away when they saw what was happening with Megatron, that he was defecting, you thought, okay, well, what does that mean for Tarn, and how is he going to take to that? How is he going to react to that? So that's the huge powder keg that sits underneath season 2, and yes, you'll see them in a big way down the line.
Hi there, James. Wonderful to see you today. We gotta just say, I and I know plenty of other people absolutely love the Rung character. Terrific character. And kind of back a little bit to this sort of functionalist sub-story going on with his alt mode, and I'm not gonna ask for specifics, but is there gonna be more with that? I mean, it was a fantastic sort of throwing off of the whole functionalist movement, his lack of a definable alt mode. Is there going to be more? I mean, some people are thinking, you know, maybe it's Metroplex's middle finger. Are we going to get more Rung alt mode action?
Okay, well, I was going to put a line through that idea with my face. That's one less idea I can use. Yes, I mean, in short, I mean, there's. I've got a half-finished analogy, which I'm not even going to attempt, but well, I am about to attempt. But no, if you think of various strata of stories within all the MITCI, you've got sort of the top line stuff is the things you're getting every issue, every month, and more often than not, there is a top line story which resolves itself in an issue. And so with issue 20, season 2, 28, there was the Megatron World thing. And bearing in mind, nothing ever fully resolves itself, but I mean, within the pages of that issue, there was sort of a conclusion of sorts. Issue 29, there was the Trailcutter thing with his drinking problem, not a sentence you hear often, these things. And that sort of resolved itself. And so you've got sort of the episodic stuff which resolves itself, and then there's progressively deeper stories which take longer to unfold and resolve, and Rung is deep down there somewhere. But it's, you know, you've got to go back and sort of spin the plates now and then to keep the plates spinning. Oh, and this is going to sound like that was fed to me, that question, but I'll be around in the art. I think I'll be in the Artist Sally later on, and I've got some scripts from all MITCI which have been copiously annotated and added to deleted scenes and things. And issue 22 with the Rung alt mode thing is one of them. So swing by. Plug. It's like a proper chat show now.
James Roberts, I really want to thank you for making this such a great comic. It's really got me hyped up for the Transformers comics, but here's the biggest question of all. What's going to become of Rodimus and Drift?
Well, Rodimus isn't in a good place at the moment, is he? Being dead. Yeah, Drift is out there. Drift hasn't been forgotten. Drift, you know, there's again, with a big cast, sometimes people need to step back and let someone else have some attention, but they'll always return. Drift will come back to more than meets the eye. I won't tell you when.
Hi, the question is, More Than Meets the Eye has a pretty high quotient of original characters you've come up with, particularly in the villains spectrum. I was curious which one was your favorite and what your inspirations have been for each of the villains. Like, Tyrus has always given me kind of a James Bond villain feel.
Yeah. I think, as a rule, I'll only reach for an original character if there isn't a pre-existing character that does the job. And there aren't many, with the Decepticons, I think, you know, you've got the big hitters, you've got the Scorponok's and Shockwaves and Megatrons, and they're pretty much accounted for, most of them. And then a surprising number of the other Decepticons have made cameos, or you know, it's been established where they are, and they're sort of they're troops and soldiers and things. So it's in that area that I find myself having to create new characters. Or like in the case of Farmer, let me think. You know, with the twist with Farmer being, you know, betraying Ratchet, a figure from Ratchet's past. There weren't many other medics. I mean, we had First Aid in there. There weren't many other established medics in the franchise that we could use for that. Farmer's probably I think is my favourite baddie. And that's actually because, in a way, of the reaction from the fans, you know. I mean, I like the character, and Alex's design is fantastic, and that's always a huge bonus. You know, that's what really brings it to life. But he made a big impact on people after issues 4 and 5. 4 and 5, Farmer did. He wasn't originally going to come back in Remain in Light. I mean, I didn't get to page 21 and think, oh, I know, have Farmer turn up on the next page. But, you know, in the 6 months earlier, you know, I thought, well, Farmer might come back one day, but I don't know when. But bringing him back in Remain in Light has sort of given him another boost in people's consciousness. So I'm fond of him. The DJD, Tar in particular, and that's another one that's gone down well with people, I think. So, yeah, I'd say Tar and Farmer. The Tyrest thing, very quickly, is interesting because, I mean, we first saw Tyrest in Last Stand of the Records at the end, issue 5, in a flashback. And that was just Nick and I talking, saying, you know, everyone assumes that Tyrest is a thing. Tyrest is a piece of legislation or a place name or whatever. And we just thought, let's have fun and turn it on its head and reveal him, you know, in the closing pages of Last Stand, reveal him to be a person. And we deliberately kept his face in shadow because Nick and I again had vague plans if we were to return to these characters, that his face was going to be sort of almost like the prow of a ship. He was going to have two faces representing, you know, his unbiased nature as a judge. He was going to be able to see both sides at the same time. So we deliberately kept his face in shadow in that one panel where he appears in Records. And then when it came to Remain in Light, and Alex and I were talking about what Tyrest's face looked like, it was hard to make it look anything other than very odd on the page. So he had normal face with a.
Well, number one, thank you very much for being here. Number two, thank you very much for the Rewind and Chrome Dome art that you have going. Being an alternative lifestyle Transformers fan, I find it incredible. But my question is, where did you come up with the idea of the Conjunction Dura? And have there been a lot of backlash from fans about that?
Second question first. Not that I'm aware of. In fact, well, maybe I'm just lucky, but all I'm 95% of what I've heard has been positive, and I think that says a lot of good things about Transformers fandom. So I've been reassured by people's reaction to that, which generally is much like yours. So great, that's good. I've said before as well that IDW and Hasbro were both very cool about it and were supportive, so that was good. The Kundrix and Dura thing, that could open up a much bigger discussion about the use of language in Northern HCI and Transformers generally. The reliance, some would say a reliance on Earth colloquialisms and slang. And I mean, I personally, and your mileage may vary, but I personally, I find if I've got two characters talking and they're going to be late for something, and you know, we've got to be there in 5 minutes. I'd rather have one say, we've got to be there in 5 minutes than I've got to be there in 2.36 astrocycles. Because you don't, unless you refer to the footnote or the matrix at the end, you know, the ready reckoner, which tells you what that is, you don't really know for certain what they're talking about. And actually the act of having to translate that into Earth units, ironically takes you out of that story. When the intention, that's why it's ironic, is to sort of conjure up more of the colour and detail of their universe. I think it does the opposite. And you know, it's the old TARDIS translation circuit thing. Everything you're they're all talking in Cybertronian. All the signs, all the signage is in Cybertronian. It's translated for your benefit. And when you read an Earth colloquialism or slang, it just so happens there's a Cybertronian equivalent, which isn't an exact match, but what you're reading is the closest there is to it. So with Hundreds Endura, I wanted, so all that said, if there is a way of playing up to the alienness of the Transformers culture, then that's the better thing to do. Let's dive in, let's world build, let's give some colour and detail to things. So this was an example of, I thought, an area where we could introduce conceptually a type of relationship which is analogous to marriage, romantic, whatever. It's got elements of all of that in it, but it needed its own name, and it deserved its own name, so it got one. And it's bedding in. In fact, I think it's reappeared in More Than Meets the Eye since. I know there's more coming up. I know there's a variation on it coming up as well. So we're unpacking it. We're exploring it conceptually.
Hi, James. First of all, thank you for getting me and everyone else in this room probably to care about pipes. Thank you for that.
Pipes. Oh, I remember.
Well, since issue 1, you've teased stuff like, the coffin, the basement, the kitchen healthy. Since then, though, you've had Dark Cybertron happen, and you've had access to different characters now. Has any of those plans changed since then? Like, who would be in the coffin? Or something like that?
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear. The question is, to the person in the coffin, was that always going to be Rodimus? Is that?
Yeah, like, was it going to be someone else originally, or?
It was always going to be Rodimus. The story around that revelation would have been different. Obviously, when I mapped out those first 12 issues of More Than Meets the Eye, the idea of Megatron arriving on the ship, much less as an Autobot, was obviously didn't exist. And I think I've said before that his arrival. I've said before that his arrival didn't change any of the any of the pre-existing sort of fundamental plot points that are around the corner, which is good. Yes, there's been some modifications necessary, and yes, Megatron's arrival has definitely led to the creation of new major plot points, which is good. But no, the coffin was something which, I mean, the message at the end of issue 1 with the various warnings. I mean, that speaks to a lot of stuff that was mapped out, not all of which we've seen yet. So, yeah, short answer: yes, it was going to be all of this. The manner in which they found him would have been different.
Thank you.
Hi, James.
Hello.
Hey, kind of a selfish question, I guess.
How did you say kind of an insulting question?
No,
okay.
Selfish.
That's all right. It's quite an aggressive setup if it was in a It's nice to give me a warning. I'm going to insult you now. Sorry, a selfish question. Okay, that's cool.
How are we going to get a toy of Rung if he doesn't turn into anything?
That, my friend, was a sacrifice on my part for the narrative, for the greater narrative good. I thought, and let's address the Mary Sue things head on here. I thought, we could have. I thought if Rung turned into something amazingly cool, if it was like I don't know, an escape pod or a mining vehicle or a spaceship or whatever, that pushes it much closer to the possibility of having a toy. But More Than Meets the Eye, the plot needs trump everything else, so we ended up where we are. Who knows? Maybe someday there'll be a Wrong toy and Wrong will turn into whatever it is that you saw in issue 22. Who knows? Hey, but there's always Nautica.
Well, how does that tie into him being designed as a ladder truck?
How's it tie into what?
There was an Alex Milne sketch of
Yes.
Rung with an Ultima.
I can't remember. Actually, I talk about this in the another plug in that script. I described in detail to Alex what I wanted Rung to look like for Chaos Theory. I can't remember whether I said he turned into this or that, and therefore needed a wheel on his back. I know Alex, and this is a good thing. I said, but Alex is very, very good. He needs, unless there is a bulletproof logic, a watertight logic to the two modes of a transformer when he's designing them, unless he can see in his head how one would turn into the other, it doesn't fly. So he's driven by an admirable logic when it comes to designing the character. So maybe I just described Rung's robot mode, and Alex thought, he must turn into something. I think it turns into this. I'll give him a wheel on his back. So when it came to issue 22 and we had the story about the bet and what he turned into, it was necessary for me then to explain away the wheel on his back as like a wheelbarrow. And I like to think that there was a time when there were lots of people like Rung, with wheelbarrows going about their business on Cybertron. Like a juxtaposition between sort of futurism and sort of agriculture.
Thank you.
We have time for 2 more questions. He's had his hand up forever, so he'll go, and then whoever raises their hand the highest will be the second.
I can give shorter, for everyone's benefit, I'll give shorter answers if we can want to squeeze some more in.
Okay, James, go ahead and pick a couple then.
Thanks.
I'm putting it in here.
Abrogating responsibility. Right, okay, you, there. No, see, it doesn't work. It doesn't. Oh, I was pointing. Yes. Yeah. Okay.
As much as I've loved all of the ongoing plot twists and turns, I want to know, there's one sort of ongoing thing that I thought seemed unresolved in the Dark Cybertron storyline, which was when the Lost Light made its way back to Cybertron. I didn't want to see Chrome Dome yelling at Prowl. I wanted to see Fortress Maximus's response, and I thought he would have dragged himself out of a hospital bed with one arm if he could to wring his neck. And so I'd like to know, where is Fort Max and what's happening with him?
Fort Max is on Luna 1 with Red Alert and some of the Circle of Light. And Fort Max is the new enforcer, isn't he? He's Magnus's successor, and he's coming back in a way in a few issues' time. So there's more Fort Max story to come.
Yes. One question. Will we be seeing Grimlock and the Scavengers anytime soon?
Yes. In roundabout, I'm trying to think. Probably, yeah. Sooner rather than later. Season 2, definitely. There's a 2-parter coming up.
Well, that's a pretty short answer, so one more question.
Okay, well, I can just, so the answer is yes, no, and maybe for you and for me. It doesn't work the other way around, does it? Okay, if we take you with the cap, and then we'll squeeze one in behind. So, yeah, these two. Do it Twitter style, 140 characters.
Are there any plans to destroy the Earth so we don't have to have any more pesky human characters?
No, that's John's area. I have no plans to destroy the Earth. Yes.
Is it going to remain on the back burner, or are we going to eventually find out what's in Brainstorm's briefcase?
Have you seen the solicits for issue 34? Briefcase is opened.
And on that bombshell.
Please come back for the second session to make up the numbers. Right, okay, well, yeah, I'm doing, I think, you've seen the schedule, I'm doing some signings. I've got another one of these tomorrow, I think. I'm with the IDW panel on Sunday, and I'll be somewhere in Artist Alley with scripts and talk, you know. So, thanks. Do I?